Well, good morning, everybody. As I leave you on this current satellite image for just a moment, I want to give you a couple of quick announcements. The first was agweather.com went down this morning, and the main reason for that is we are kind of blowing through our bandwidth limitations on the server that I use to create that site, which is a good thing. I'm smiling right now because that means you're using it and using it well. I'm going to make a major upgrade to it this week so that we don't have that happen again. So I just want to apologize if you were trying to use the site this morning and it was down. The second thing is this layout of today's video. I've got to talk about what happened this past weekend with the ring of fire precipitation and the heat and where the flooding is right now and its impact on ag. We're then going to walk forward in the forecast to see if folks that have missed out on this rain are going to get some storms out of this pattern. Speaking of the pattern, the main thing we're going to have to talk about is persistence the right way to forecast the rest of July? And that's all the farther we're going to look out today. At the end of this, I'm going to give you some global weather updates, and we're going to talk about the hurricane season. So that's where we're going in this forecast video. Anyway, I left you on this for a moment because I was hoping you would see what I saw. This is the tail end of the front that finally came through and knocked out some of the heat that was in this section of the country. Now, it wasn't much of a relief for some folks, but it was something different. And as we go forward today, we're going to be watching this complex of storms that is in the Dakotas this morning, excuse me, and how it progresses across the northern plains where we have the risk of severe storms today in the upper Midwest. And we're also just going to be paying attention to where the flow is going to be heading in this near term. I think if I could just put a tag on today, I want you to be watching this area very carefully. And I've made a circle, and you know what that circle represents. That is likely where we're going to be seeing the most persistent ridging to finish June, start July. And I use that word persistence very carefully because I think that if you want to do a good long-range forecast right now, persistence is going to be the name of the game. And I want to make that case for you in just a few minutes. But really quickly, I wanted to show you last night as the front came through. There it is. All right, we can see some isolated convection, some broader cloud here, some storms in the southeast. But look at this southwest monsoon. That's going to be a critical piece to this forecast because if we build ridging in here, some win and some lose. That's the unfortunate part of building in a slower, more stagnant pattern across the southern tier of the U.S. We will open up the monsoon, but this area could get very, very hot and very dry going forward, and I'm very concerned about that. Elsewhere, some larger convection that blew up in the parts of the Pacific Northwest. I'm really thinking here about parts of Montana extending into Saskatchewan. And something to remember, Canada's had a very cool and extremely wet early spring time period, and that's presenting its own bit of challenges here. Things are a bit smoky in the west, but you can see towards sunset as the angle at which the sun strikes the smoke hits the satellite at a much more oblique angle, and we can start to see some of the wildfire smoke here. But I just want to show you something. One of my favorite websites, coolweather.com. Go to it, coolweather.com, coolwx.com. You can go create an animation like the one you're watching here, which shows you in color coding with dots any weather station that either approached or set a new record in terms of high temperatures or low temperatures. And as this resets, it's a reminder how cool last week started in parts of the Pacific Northwest as the heat built in here. And we had some frost events last week, which we talked about. So question is going to be, are we going to stay on this same kind of setup where the northern tier of the U.S. is where the jet is entering and living, while we see ridging and higher heights and much warmer temperatures just building in through this area and possibly setting up residence over a major part of the U.S. ag belt, which is right here in this part of the country. So let's kind of get in and try to figure this out. What it did last week, if you just look over the last 7 days, the ridge began here and it kind of flattened out into this region. There was a corridor that we were able to open up some storms in through this area, but for the most part, if you were under that ridge, things were really dry and quite hot. Now, running its periphery, we had a very weak tropical system that tried to make it into Georgia. I had more hopes for rainfall out of this in Georgia and South Carolina. We did, however, get better flow out of the east, initiating a lot of storms across Florida, which, remember, northern Florida's been in pretty significant drought and still is. But coming here, this was what the moisture plume from Alberto looked like. The southwest monsoon has been going because of the position of that ridge. And then across the northern tier, that's where our jet stream flow has been. And what happens is all of this comes together here. So flow in the jet stream, ridge flow, and there was a large area in through here that picked up between 6 and some places over 15 inches of rain. And this map is really, this is a critical map given the time of year. And we need to address kind of how this stacks up against history. First of all, I want to show you something else. I got a lot of questions about river flooding because if you saw anything on social media about the severe weather and the rainfall, you saw a lot of large river systems flooding. But I was getting questions, is this going to be causing major issues all the way down the Mississippi? And as I show you right now, I'll just take you to Memphis. You'll notice that the Mississippi water levels in Memphis have dropped. And that may not make a whole lot of sense. Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. This side, okay, of the Mississippi Basin, the northern tributaries, contributes a significant amount, but the Ohio River is the main contributor. And don't forget, we have the Illinois River in here as well. And these two parts of the Mississippi Basin have not. They're very, very dry. There's not good flow into those two parts of the river system. But this part of the Missouri and then all of the tributaries that feed into eventually the Mississippi Basin here, well, you can see we've got a lot of river gauges that are showing up with some sort of action, minor, moderate, or major flooding right now. And it's been really, really bad. There's a lot of waterlogged fields in this area. If I could show it to you in a little different way, this is our last 30 days as a percent of normal. And you can see right here, this is Sioux Falls setting at right now 3 times the normal rainfall in the last 30 days. Now remember, this mostly came in the last week, where some places in and around Sioux Falls picked up to 15 inches of rainfall. But I just want you to take note that there are a few areas east of the Rocky Mountains I'm watching carefully. Here, this corridor, and then the whole of the southeast getting up toward the mid-Atlantic. There are pockets in through there that are just exceptionally dry. Now, that is not to ignore the West, but we think of the West and its Mediterranean climate in California as being dry this time of year. That's actually needed for agriculture here. And as you get into pockets of the Pacific Northwest, like parts of Idaho and sections of Montana are quite dry, so is the Columbia Basin. But this is a region of the country that is very dependent on irrigation waters, and actually timing of precipitation can be detrimental, honestly, at times to the crops that are grown here. So that's why I'm focusing more on some other regions. Let's take a look specifically at the kind of north central United States here, because I just want to make a point that last weekend's rain, okay, when added to the previous weeks, there's a huge section here that have had 2 to 3 times normal rainfall. And then you get into southern Iowa. Southern Iowa to northwest Iowa, 20% to nearly 300%. And what we're trying to ask is, will storms build into the rest of this part of our Cornbelt as we go forward in time? And then what about down here in the southern plains? This, again, I told you earlier, is the area that I'm most concerned about for continuing the risk of high heat and rapid drought development. From there, I want to take you to the southeast again, because once again, I had better hopes for this tropical system here to get in and pull more moisture into Georgia and maybe into the parts of South Carolina. Some folks did get some of that moisture, but overall, you look back over the last 30 days, and there's a large section here, a lot of cotton acres, peanut acres, corn, but we grow a lot of stuff down in Georgia. Please remember, this is a big powerhouse of an ag state, and you stretch that up into parts of the Carolinas and Virginia, and we're just dry. So I'm thinking about all of this because this is this critical point. We're past the solstice, and we're now heading, headlong into the middle of summer, and we want to know what temperatures are going to do and what precipitation is going to do. But I showed you that. I want to get here. How about some ranks? If you look back from May 26th to June 23rd, it really begins to show you how dry things have been. In that 1 month time period, all right, we have a couple of climate reporting districts in North Carolina that are the driest for that time period on record. Meanwhile, from this part of South Dakota coming out of Nebraska into Iowa, the southern counties of Minnesota, getting into this part of Wisconsin, it's nearly the wettest. And there's questions about what this all could mean as the pattern goes forward. And I've made a case that this is a moisture source for what could be, if the flow sets up right, storms going in this direction. So just to let you know, if you're getting some rain in the near term, and I'll show you where it's coming, and maybe the rest of Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, like this whole region, the moisture we typically get is evaporated water from the Gulf of Mexico. But what you're now going to be getting is recycled moisture from, as we talked about last week, kind of the brown ocean idea, out of Minnesota and Iowa and parts of South Dakota. So this will be a very interesting pattern to watch in the next 7 days. But I got asked a lot of questions about how this time period compares to 1993. So if you're curious, May 26th to June 24th, 1993 looked like this. Now you'll notice that 1993 is not a good analog to this year. And what caused 1993 to be the way it was, I'll draw on the next graphic I'm going to show you in a few moments, but way different. The only thing that was consistent was the ridge of high pressure that was moving into this area, which we did have last week. But remember, that's the first large ridge that the East Coast, sliding through the Ohio Valley and sitting eventually down here into the Mid-South, into the Southern Plains. That's the first one we've had. 93 saw large ridging constantly setting up here in May through June, and then became fully established in this area in July. And the jet stream actually had another big ridge that was way up north here, and the flow coming in between it like this. And that's what made 93 so exceptionally wet for so many people. But remember, 1993 didn't start getting wet until mid to late June. And then it was mid to late June through July that made it so incredibly wet. So I just wanted to make a solid point about some differences here. It's been super wet, but the pattern that has driven what we just saw in this section of the United States, it was just much different than it was in 1993, which means there's more than one way to make a flood. That's the big idea. So do I think 1993 is an analog? I don't. But right now our soil moisture down to 100 centimeters or 40 inches is beginning to show these problem areas. And the Cornbelt is split. Really the west and northwest of the Cornbelt versus the east into the southeast part of the Cornbelt is really showing up with major precipitation differences. And we have questions as to whether or not we can still get this corridor to open up towards storms. Now that's just the Cornbelt side of this. What about getting into this area here? Whoops, that's a backwards arrow. Let's try that again. What about getting into this area here? Some moisture, and then how about the east? So let's get in and start to have a good discussion about this. I want to tell you the thing that I'm going to be using until I have better evidence to overturn this. The longer range models, I think, are unable to give you any sort of an accurate representation of what the week-to-week pattern adjustments are going to be. So I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to watch. I think persistence is going to be the key thing. So since the beginning of June, this is what our jet stream has done. I've made a case that it has not lost momentum coming off the Pacific. And that case has been made because if you compare these winds here to normal June winds, normal looks like that. That's average for June. Same color bar, same range of speeds here. This is this year, and this is what average is. So if you take note, where, if anywhere, have we lost some momentum? It's been in the North Atlantic. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the reality of it is that we have had flow that is a bit farther north than average, but moving very quickly along the U.S.-Canada border. What's interesting about this is we typically see flow like this in response to an El Nino. And we're building toward La Nina. So the atmosphere has more, like I just said earlier, has more than one way of cranking like it's doing in this area. And until I see something that tells me that this is going to shut down, I think that the forecast I'm about to give you will go on repeat through maybe most of July. So what's that going to be? Well, what's driving this? Because, again, it is much faster than the climatological normal. Okay? What's driving it, I think, is the contrast in ocean temperatures right here. So we've said this a few times. There's something called the thermal wind relationship, and that is where you have warmer to the south, colder in places to the north. What ends up happening is the slope along a pressure surface in the atmosphere is very high here and low there, therefore the slope is great. And it's that slope that drives the pressure gradient or the height gradient, which ultimately drives the wind. And the wind goes right in between. It's turned to the right because of the Coriolis effect. So in other words, the slope is this way, but it's turned to the right, which means it goes that direction, and the flow just continues. Until something upsets this temperature balance in the North Pacific, until something changes that gradient, I have to tell you that persistence is going to be the forecast going forward. There is a La Nina trying to develop. Very warm Atlantic. This is key, though, for the North Atlantic, because we've been building in higher and higher pressure into this area. So our Bermuda High has been a bit displaced a bit farther to the north. And what I'm worried about, so in other words, if you say, Eric, what's persistence? Persistence is flow staying here, going over this ridge, and high pressure developing here over this heat, And as a result of this flow, high pressure living somewhere in this area. Now, I know I drew that as a bit of a squashed high pressure cell, but I think it's squashed because of the speed and flow to the north and the cooler air that's going to live in the Canadian prairie and along the northern tier of the United States. So let's take that, and you need to just understand that I think that this pattern, that's why I'm spending so much time on it, is something you're going to see on repeat in July until something blows this up. Could it be a tropical system? Sure. Could it be in the Pacific or the Atlantic? Yeah, I don't know. Something's got to come through and do a major, major disruption to this. Until I find that thing, this is what you've got. All right? So now let's build a story on it. The jet stream today is really showing this, right? So can you see its net position? It's unbroken. It's not split coming into the west. It's just north. And it's just moving. So remember, there are some years where I'm like, oh, the jet just build up into a big ridge here, split around the top, and it all comes together. No. That was earlier in this decade. We don't have that right now. So what does all of this kind of mean as we go forward? Well, today, you can see where we have the heat advisories, a large area from the Gulf Coast all the way up into Minnesota and parts of South Dakota, broad area of heat advisory here. These are all the flood warnings that were still out from the weekend's precipitation. Now from here, take a look at this pattern. You know I've been really enjoying the AIFS. I keep saying it in every video, but I want you to understand there's a reason why. It's been doing a better and better job at seeing the pattern for what it is. Troughs sneaking across this area. So there's that northerly flow we're talking about. Going into the end of this weekend, what we have to be watching is this ridge placement here. The beginning of this week. And the flow that's going to come out of the northwest into this area. Because under this is our brown ocean. There's the trough. And what this might do is initiate storms as little waves kind of wiggle around the back side of this through the middle of this week. See, there's one right there. Now, I'll come back to it in just a few seconds as you see the details. But as we get here toward the end of the week, big trough sneaks through. This is going to produce, again, the risk of strong to severe storms across the Cornbelt, the northern tier of the United States, Great Lakes. Remember, that trough entered in the northwest by Thursday. I'll show you that in a second. But then watch what happens. By Sunday the 30th, Monday the 1st, where does our ridge live? It just kind of keeps opening up in this area while troughs just dance across the northern tier of the United States. In fact, right out here on July 2nd, ridge there, ridge here, big ridge there. Now watch, from July 2nd to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, where does the ridge come back to? Well, this one shifted a bit. This one opened up. So see how they kind of just move in kind of tandem with one another while the flow just continues to hit the northwest and run across the Canadian prairie. This is the region that keeps going on repeat with ridges. Okay, take all that and do something with it. You get this. There's the flow across the north, the ridging that tries to keep opening up in this area, the flow that comes around it, and the storms that get initiated that come through this corridor. Now, what's tough to forecast with this is where's the northern extent, especially in this very agriculture productive region of our country. Where is the northern extent of the thunderstorm activity, and where does it stop? Because it appears, if you just look at the European ensemble for the next 14 days, if you get south of, let's just call that I-70, we start to just increase the risk of drier and drier conditions. And if you move here over toward like the Red River Valley of the South, the risk of just keeping the heat on and keeping it drier with only isolated convection seems to be the name of the game. Take this map and just stare at it for a few minutes. Pause it and have a look, because I think this is the most critical piece to this forecast, at least interpreting what that pattern's going to do. So here we go today. Broad area in the upper Midwest for the risk of severe storms. Tomorrow the front's going to slide through, so it's going to be here. We'll take a look at the timing in a second. By the time we get out to the 26th, we're going to watch that frontal boundary slide even farther to the south. That's where our main risk area is going to be. To see it on the high-res NAM, let's play this for, in fact, let's blow that up one. There we go. This is getting through this morning, playing into this afternoon and this evening. Remember the storm complex I said to watch that's here in the Dakotas? It could be by tonight blowing up into a pretty large complex of storms right over the top of a place that doesn't want another drop of rain. Here's our first front leaving, some possible storms that could get on the Carolina coast, which we need. And then you can see right around it. That's where we're still getting that flow that's coming off of Mexico into Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado. This is tonight, playing into early tomorrow morning. Now, if these storms can make it through northern Illinois, into central Illinois, into Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, see how they kind of fade out right there? This is all about timing, but this is all about other bigger features in the atmosphere. This is why I'm concerned about I-70. Did you notice that? Now, again, it's terrible timing for the storms to try to survive, but through the morning, they fade right along that boundary. We then play this forward into Tuesday. We see the storms trying to reignite. Can they just press farther and farther to the south? See how they kind of bust up in this area? That's what we have to be watching. Now, that's not to ignore all the other places. Another trough comes into the northwest. We see storms throughout the mountains. But I'm watching these clusters of storms rolling through, taking what has been exceptionally wet over to where it's been exceptionally dry. And I just focus on this area because I spent the weekend talking to farmers in this region. Lots of questions about this. So let's take a look at our models. Shrink this up one. There we go. The newest artificial intelligence forecast for the next 7 days. All right, can you see it? There's the flow. Continued wet. Here's the potential for those storm clusters. Watch this boundary right in through here. We then see drier Texas, drier up the plains, drier in the southeast. Not what we want to see. Let's compare models. There's the NBM. The storm clusters this week will be absolutely critical to the success of the U.S. crop in this area. But notice where the ridge lives and meanders back and forth, that's where we have the driest conditions while the southwest monsoon gets going. Canadian prairie stays wet. How about the WPC? European. And finally, the GFS. There's a lot of consistency in these forecasts, at least in the placement of the features. Did you notice that? So if we take a look at probabilities, this is the best chance of getting an inch in the next 10 days from the ensemble. Now remember, this is just, we only look at this for pattern. We don't look at this honestly for amount because the resolution is so low and it's summertime. But we're trying to just assess who's going to be on the wetter side of things and who's going to be on the drier. And I should have got a new model run in there. I did. So let's go back and just flip this back and take you out 10 days. Right there. So now you know why I circled this area. And the reason is that's where the ridge keeps rebuilding and living, kind of meandering back and forth. And that's what's got me concerned overall. So again, this is the probability of staying under a ½ inch. I do want to compare the models for you very quickly. Let's pick this up this afternoon and this evening. And again, we're going to watch these complexes of storms rolling through the upper Midwest. We'll then play into Tuesday and Wednesday. That front tries to clear. This is now getting into, there we go. This is on Wednesday into Thursday. I had much more hope for this front as it comes into the mid-Atlantic down to the Carolinas, but right now the models have really backed off on its potential for delivering a lot of rain. So where am I? I'm on Thursday here watching this. The next storm system enters the northwest. You know exactly where it's going to go, right along the U.S.-Canada border. So this is Thursday, getting into Friday, another potentially very wet one here across the northern tier of the United States, hitting some of those same acres. And then can we get a front to drag through here by next weekend, bringing in some rainfall into some critical areas here that have been dry? That's possible. This is Saturday afternoon and evening. Here comes the high pressure that follows all of this, knocking the temperatures back as we try to finish June and start July. But where the heat rebounds and rebuilds will be right here. And here goes the next system, right across the northern tier of the United States all the way through July 2nd. So you can see this pattern really has persistence to it. And while it'll be different day to day, there'll be little nuances in the position of the lows. The idea is simply this. There's broader flow like this here. So southwest monsoon, storm track, storm clusters, possibly building into this area. Be careful of that I-70 boundary. I hope I'm wrong on the I-70 boundary, but that's what I'm currently seeing. Okay, what about week 2? Well, just to show you, this is the newest update from the CPC. Very similar story to what the European model has. And I just want to tell you that I think that, again, the GFS and its dry bias in the southeast is really showing up here. But be very wary of being above average in terms of precipitation in the southeast. That's the European model says. We'll keep an eye on this for the rest of this week. Temperature-wise, today, very hot. This is the forecast high temperatures for today on Monday. This does not include the heat index. Just want to let you know these are temperatures, not heat index. So this is from Monday into Tuesday, still keeping the triple-digit heat around. Frontal boundary sneaks in by Wednesday across the northern tier of the U.S., so this follows the storms we're watching earlier this week. But take a look at what's going on behind it. There's already a warm-up up the plains. Next deep trough comes in the northwest, cooler conditions there. This is now getting into Friday, another hot one. Look at this. That's why I'm so worried about this area. Much colder in Montana. Cold air spreads across the northern tier of the U.S. on Saturday and Sunday. But if you stay in this corridor here, the temperatures stay above average for a while. Take a look at the day 5 through 10. Again, this area is not able to pick up a lot of heat while we stay very hot in through this region compared to average. Day 10 through 15, same story. And I'm just going to make a point here. It was the GFS that found this first. So I remember I said, I'm not so sure. Well, the GFS did it, and it had it right. Let's go take a look at the European, though, because now it's got a similar story. That's day 5 through 10, which gets us out to the 4th of July. And this is day 10 through 15. So what do you see? Contrast. That's the thing that has to change. So I am a bit surprised at this. This is the new European model outlook for the next 30 days. In fact, let's just do all of July. That is all of July. And what I want to know is, if we build higher than normal pressure here and here, I'm confused as to why the model shows lower pressure, unless it's just a heat feedback in the model. But I think we're going to see it more often than not somewhere in this area. So if you're around the edge of it, storms. If you're in it, continued heat. In fact, let's zoom in and just have a look at what the model is suggesting in terms of precip. Now remember, I'm saying just suggesting in terms of precip. You can see, though, that's where it's got this anchored dryness. And all around the periphery, that's where we have to keep an eye out for the better chances of rain. Again, I've got to be proved that it's actually going to get wet in this area. The model's been too wet in the southeast for too long. Temperatures, though, this does make sense to me. Yeah, that's been a story for a while, and that makes some sense to me. All right, so what do you need to watch? Can I come back to this real quick? Strong flow here. Jet stream is to the north. Watch for building high pressure here, and as a result, there. That is the story that I want you to walk out of this morning thinking about with me for the rest of July. That's it, okay? Okay, bigger picture things. The tropics. We've now started to see the European ensemble beginning to pick up on better chances of low pressure development here over the next 10 days. However, it is very dusty, as we talked about on Friday. A lot of Saharan dust getting blown across. Watch this reset. There it goes. Big dust plumes being blown across the open Atlantic. And early in the season, this tends to suppress a lot of early tropical convection. We'll have to see how it evolves going forward. No real changes overall in my hurricane forecast given these ocean temperatures and the fact that La Nina is developing. So from there, let's go talk about some other places around the world. You've probably heard lately about the precipitation disparity in China as well. So for example, just to the south of what's called the North China Plain, very agriculturally productive area here for the last 60 days has been very dry. You go over the Yangtze River in south, the Mayu front has been parked here and it's flooding. So major precipitation discrepancies. The Manchurian Plain, though, has been wetter. India, the Ganges River Valley, a late start to the monsoon. You can see here they've also dealt with exceptional heat. This is major cotton acres down here, very, very dry as well. But the southern part of India has already seen the advancement of the monsoon. If we go over to parts of Russia, find the Black Sea. This is that section of the Russian wheat belt, which we've been discussing has been so dry. Same thing with this side of Ukraine, eastern Ukraine. We just need to see if that's going to continue in the pattern. If we look over the next 10 days, the first thing that we see changing is the much colder air that's moving out of Western Russia into Kazakhstan. And the reason why we're cooler here in India is primarily because of the rainfall that is finally advancing north there. There's still dryness in the North China Plain. We're a bit drier at times in the Manchurian Plain, which is north of the Korean Peninsula. But the Mayu front is still flooding here. So the Indian monsoon is really getting a kick right now. We just need to watch that. Australia, much above average precipitation for this time of year. It is winter there, of course. But Ukraine is drier, and outside of this little strip of precip in this region, much of Western Russia remains drier, which has to be discussed. This has been an ongoing problem in that area, which is hitting one of the main grain belts of the world. So I'm going to leave you there. Thank you for giving me a lot of your attention here on Monday morning. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.